The galaxy remembered the disaster. It forgot the woman who survived it. The emergency beacon pulsed through the storm every 17 seconds. A lonely flash of crimson light against the sky that looked wounded. Ice crystals hissed across the observation dome of outpost Kestrel, scraping against reinforced glass like handfuls of sand thrown by an angry giant. Beyond the barrier, the frozen plains stretched for hundreds of miles, disappearing into curtains of swirling white. Ethan Walker stood with a cup of stale coffee cooling in his hand as another gust rattled the station's outer shell. The metal groaned softly. Somewhere deep below his boots, generators answered with a steady mechanical hum. His first day at the new base had been exactly what he expected. Cold. Isolated. Quiet. Which was precisely why he had requested the transfer. After 12 years in Marine Recon, Ethan had learned that quiet was underrated. Quiet meant nobody shooting at each other. Quiet meant no politicians making promises. Quiet meant no memorial walls gaining new names. The personnel officer back on Earth had called Kestrel a dead-end assignment. Ethan had considered that a selling point. The overhead lights flickered briefly. A warning tone chimed across the observation deck. Several technicians immediately turned toward the central display. Ethan followed their gaze. The beacon had appeared again. Red. Pulsing. Identical to the previous 7 transmissions. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then someone sighed. There it is again. Another technician rubbed his eyes. 3 weeks straight. The room returned to its normal rhythm. Consoles beeped. Data scrolled. Coffee mugs lifted. Nobody seemed particularly concerned. Ethan frowned. You get distress signals every day around here? A gray-haired operator glanced over. Not this one. He tapped the screen. This one's special. Ethan stepped closer. Numbers crawled across the display. Coordinates. Atmospheric interference. Transmission decay. Beneath them sat a single identification marker. Lyra V. Wan. Ethan noticed how several nearby workers immediately looked away. One woman quietly turned off her monitor. Another pretended to study maintenance reports. The reaction was strange enough to make him curious. Who's Lyra Vane? The operator gave a short laugh. Not the amused kind. The uncomfortable kind. You're new. That's usually how first days work. Fair point. The older man leaned back in his chair. 5 years ago, Expedition 12 disappeared north of the plasma shelf. He pointed toward the endless white horizon beyond the glass. 7 specialists. 2 transports. State-of-the-art equipment. Ethan nodded. What happened? Nobody knows. The answer came too quickly. Too rehearsed. Officially? Ethan asked. Equipment failure. The operator's expression tightened. Unofficially? A long silence followed. Even the nearby conversations seemed quieter. Finally, the man pointed toward the name on the screen. Only one person came back. Ethan looked at the beacon again. Lyra V. Wan. She survived. Yeah. And? The operator stared through the glass toward the storm. People started asking why. Another pulse flashed across the display. Red. Steady. Patient. Ethan watched the signal cycle again. That doesn't explain the distress beacon. No. The man's voice dropped lower. It doesn't. Before Ethan could ask another question, the station intercom crackled overhead. Attention personnel. Command briefing in 10 minutes. Attendance mandatory. Groans echoed across the room. Chairs rolled backward. Coffee cups were abandoned. Ethan set down his drink and followed the flow of personnel moving toward the central corridor. The station's interior felt older than he expected. Narrow passageways. Exposed pipes. Scuffed steel floors polished by decades of boots. Warm air flowed from ceiling vents carrying the faint scent of machine oil and recycled oxygen. Practical. Functional. Nothing fancy. Exactly the sort of place built by engineers who cared more about survival than appearances. The briefing chamber was nearly full by the time Ethan arrived. Officers, scientists, mechanics, pilots. About 60 people total. Most looked tired. The kind of tired that settled into a person's posture after years spent far from home. Ethan found an empty seat near the back. The room dimmed. Commander Rebecca Shaw stepped onto the platform. Mid-50s. Short silver hair. Sharp eyes. The kind of person who probably intimidated computers. "Good morning." Nobody answered. Wonderful enthusiasm. A few reluctant chuckles surfaced. Shaw activated the holographic display. The frozen landscape appeared above the stage. White mountains. Storm fronts. Jagged blue canyons. Then came a blinking red marker. Ethan immediately recognized it. The beacon. 3 weeks ago, Shaw began. Our sensors detected a repeating signal originating from Sector 9. The room stiffened. We've attempted remote analysis. Atmospheric interference prevents confirmation. Nobody looked surprised. Which meant this wasn't new information. Shaw folded her hands behind her back. Yesterday, we received authorization to investigate. This time the reaction was immediate. Several officers exchanged uneasy looks. One scientist muttered something under his breath. Nobody appeared excited. Nobody appeared relieved. Ethan noticed that. Missions usually generated energy. Anticipation. Curiosity. This generated dread. Shaw seemed to notice too. I understand the concerns. Nobody argued. The holographic marker blinked again. Red. Patient. Waiting. Nevertheless, we are moving forward. Ethan felt the atmosphere shift. Not dramatically. Just enough. The way air changed before a storm reached you. Shaw looked toward the rear of the room. Directly at him. Walker. Ethan blinked. Ma'am? Welcome to Kestrel. Several heads turned toward him. Thank you. You're just in time. Something about her expression made the back of Ethan's neck tighten. Not fear. Instinct. The same feeling he'd learned to trust years ago. The feeling that usually arrived seconds before a situation became much more complicated than expected. Shaw touched a control on her wrist. The holographic display changed. The frozen landscape vanished. A personnel file appeared instead. A woman's face filled the room. Pale blue skin. Silver white hair. Violet eyes. Calm expression. Beneath the image glowed a single name. Lyra V. Wan. Every conversation stopped. Every movement ceased. Even the ventilation seemed quieter. Commander Shaw took a slow breath. Then she said 4 words that instantly changed Ethan Walker's first day at Outpost Kestrel. You'll be working together. The silence that followed seemed heavier than the storm outside. Ethan remained seated as dozens of eyes shifted between him and the holographic image suspended above the briefing room. Lyra Vane stared back from the display with calm violet eyes that revealed absolutely nothing. No fear. No pride. No apology. Just stillness. Commander Shaw deactivated the projection. The image vanished instantly, but the tension remained. It lingered in the room like static before a lightning strike. Ethan slowly stood. Respectfully, Commander, he said. I arrived 6 hours ago. A few nervous chuckles echoed from the crowd. Shaw nodded. I am aware. Then maybe assigning me to the most controversial person on the station is not the safest onboarding process. More laughter this time. Brief. Uncomfortable. Shaw almost smiled. That is exactly why I selected you. Ethan folded his arms. That explanation somehow raises more questions. Good. It means you are paying attention. The commander looked across the room. Dismissed. Chairs scraped across the floor. Personnel began filing toward the exits immediately. Nobody lingered. Nobody approached Ethan. Nobody offered congratulations. That told him everything he needed to know. Whatever history surrounded Lyra Vane, people wanted no part of it. Within seconds the briefing chamber was nearly empty. Ethan started toward the door when a voice stopped him. Walker. He turned. Shaw stood alone beside the command console. My office. 10 minutes later, Ethan sat across from her desk while a heating unit clicked quietly in the corner. Snow hammered the station outside. The office walls were covered with topographical maps and navigation charts. No decorations. No family photos. No distractions. Shaw was exactly the kind of officer he expected her to be. Efficient to the point of intimidation. She slid a data tablet across the desk. Personnel file. Ethan picked it up. Lyra's face appeared again. The same silver-white hair. The same composed expression. Species designation. Training records. Language certifications. Navigation expertise. Environmental survival ratings. Every category carried exceptional marks. Impressive resume, Ethan admitted. Very. Then why does everybody react like you assigned them a live grenade? Shaw leaned back. For a moment she simply listened to the wind outside. Because people are lazy. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That is not the answer I expected. Most people prefer simple stories. She folded her hands. Heroes. Villains. Good decisions. Bad decisions. And Lyra? Reality is usually messier. Ethan studied the file. You trust her? It was not a question. Shaw nodded once. Yes. Enough to send her into Sector 9. Yes. Enough to send me with her. Yes. Ethan considered that. Commanders rarely spoke with such certainty. What happened 5 years ago? The older woman was quiet for several seconds. When you reach the point where that information matters, you will hear it from her. Ethan frowned. Not from you? Not from me. Shaw stood. Conversation over. Your transport leaves at 0600 tomorrow. Ethan glanced toward the clock. Less than 14 hours away. I still have not met my partner. Shaw's expression became unreadable. You will. The station cafeteria was nearly empty by evening. A handful of technicians occupied distant tables beneath warm yellow lighting. Steam rose from cups of coffee. Cutlery clicked softly against trays. Outside the reinforced windows, darkness consumed the frozen landscape. Ethan carried his meal toward an empty corner table. Halfway there, he noticed something strange. Every occupied table faced one direction. Not obviously. Not intentionally. But enough to notice. He followed their collective line of sight. A woman sat alone near the far window. Silver-white hair. Pale blue skin. Violet eyes fixed on the blizzard beyond the glass. Lyra Vane. Nobody sat within 20 feet of her. Ethan stopped walking. One technician immediately noticed. Do not. Ethan looked over. Do not what? Sit there. The warning came too quickly. Too automatically. Ethan glanced between the technician and Lyra. You guys realize that only makes me more curious. Nobody answered. Ethan sighed and carried his tray across the room. The cafeteria grew noticeably quieter with every step. Lyra did not look away from the window. She seemed completely unaware of the attention surrounding her. Or perhaps she was simply used to it. Ethan set his tray down across from her. Mind if I sit? Nothing happened for a moment. Then she slowly turned. Up close, her eyes were even more striking than the personnel file suggested. Not because of their color. Because of the exhaustion hidden behind them. The kind that years of sleep could not fix. She studied him calmly. You are Ethan Walker. Not a question. You are Lyra Vane. That would explain why you are standing next to my table. Ethan smiled slightly. Good. We both know who we are. Her gaze drifted toward the untouched chair. Most people do not sit there. I noticed. And yet here you are. I have a bad habit of making my own decisions. Something almost resembling amusement flickered across her expression before disappearing. She looked back toward the storm. That habit tends to become expensive. Ethan sat anyway. Neither spoke for several seconds. The heating vents hummed overhead. Snow rattled softly against the glass. Somewhere behind them, someone dropped a spoon. Finally, Ethan glanced toward her. Tomorrow's mission. Lyra nodded once. Sector 9. You excited? She looked out into the darkness again. No. The honesty caught him off guard. That bad? You arrived today. Her voice remained calm. You still think curiosity is stronger than fear? Ethan leaned back. And you do not? For the first time her eyes met his directly. There was no hostility there. No anger. Just something colder. Older. I think there are places where curiosity leaves footprints. She looked back toward the storm. Sector 9 is one of them. Then, beyond the glass, far out in the darkness, a crimson light flashed once through the blizzard. And for the first time all evening, Ethan watched Lyra Vane lose her composure. The change lasted less than a second. Most people would have missed it. Ethan did not. Years of watching faces in briefing rooms, transport bays, and negotiations had trained him to notice tiny fractures in composure. Lyra's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Her shoulders stiffened. One hand tightened around the ceramic mug sitting untouched beside her tray. Then the moment vanished. She became still again. Calm again. Controlled again. But Ethan had already seen it. He turned toward the window. Through the swirling darkness, a faint crimson pulse flickered beyond the station perimeter. Once. Then gone. Snow swallowed the horizon immediately afterward. The beacon? Ethan asked quietly. Lyra did not answer at first. The cafeteria remained unusually silent. Several nearby personnel had noticed the flash as well. Nobody seemed eager to discuss it. Finally she nodded. The timing is wrong. Ethan frowned. Wrong how? It should not be visible from this distance. She stared through the glass. Not during a storm this strong. Another pulse appeared. Faint. Distant. Red. This time Ethan understood her concern. The signal seemed stronger than before. Closer somehow. The feeling crawled beneath his skin. You think something changed. I know something changed. Her voice remained level, but the confidence behind it was unmistakable. Ethan looked at her. And nobody else seems worried. People become comfortable when they are afraid of the same thing for long enough. That answer lingered in his mind. The beacon had been transmitting for weeks. Perhaps everyone had simply grown accustomed to it. Like a strange noise in an old house. Unsettling at first. Invisible after enough time. Lyra stood abruptly. Her chair slid backward with a soft scrape. Get some sleep, Walker. That sounds less like advice and more like an order. Take it however you like. She gathered her untouched meal. Transport leaves in 8 hours. Ethan watched her move toward the exit. You still have not explained why everybody treats you like a ghost. She paused near the doorway. The storm light cast pale reflections across her blue skin. Because ghosts are easier to understand than survivors. Then she disappeared into the corridor. Ethan remained seated for several minutes. The answer did not explain anything. Somehow it explained everything. The station lights dimmed automatically at 2200 hours. Night cycle. Hallways grew quieter. Doors sealed. Machinery settled into its familiar rhythm. Ethan lay awake in his quarters listening to the sounds around him. Air circulation. Distant generators. The occasional groan of metal as temperatures outside continued to drop. Sleep should have come easily after the long transfer flight. Instead, his thoughts kept circling the same questions. Who exactly was Lyra Vane? Why did Commander Shaw trust her when everyone else clearly did not? And why had a simple beacon visible through a storm affected her more than anything else he had said? Eventually exhaustion won. When the alarm sounded at 0500, it felt like only minutes had passed. Ethan dressed quickly and stepped into the corridor. The station was already awake. Engineers moved equipment toward loading bays. Pilots reviewed weather projections. Navigation teams exchanged reports near illuminated displays. Everyone seemed busy. Everyone seemed focused. Yet every conversation stopped briefly when Ethan walked by. The mission was no longer a secret. News traveled fast on isolated stations. By the time he reached Hangar 3, the transport vehicle was already waiting. The machine resembled a cross between an armored exploration rover and a heavy cargo hauler. Thick composite plating covered most of its surface. Massive snow treads rested beneath reinforced wheel assemblies. Antenna arrays protruded from the roof like metallic branches. Practical. Durable. Built to survive places humans were never meant to live. Ethan stepped inside. The cargo compartment smelled faintly of heated metal and fresh coolant. Equipment cases lined the walls. Emergency supplies were secured beneath restraint nets. Environmental monitors blinked softly in the dim interior. Lyra was already there. Of course she was. She sat near the cockpit reviewing navigation charts projected from a wrist console. Her silver hair reflected the pale blue cabin lights. Ethan checked the time. You arrived early. No. Her eyes remained on the display. You arrived late. Ethan laughed despite himself. By 40 seconds. 43. He dropped his duffel onto a nearby bench. You count everything? Only the things that matter. That sounds exhausting. For the first time she glanced up. There was the faintest trace of amusement again. Gone almost immediately. You talk more than most Marines. Occupational hazard. Talking? Trying to keep people from taking themselves too seriously. Lyra returned her attention to the charts. You may struggle here. Before Ethan could answer, the cargo ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss. Commander Shaw entered carrying a small metal case. The hangar behind her buzzed with activity. Workers loaded the final equipment pallets. Snow blew through the open entrance in thin white ribbons. Shaw set the case on a nearby table. Mission parameters updated overnight. Her expression was more serious than usual. Ethan immediately noticed that. Problem? Possibly. She opened the case. Inside rested a compact black transmitter. The device looked old. Older than anything else aboard the station. Scratches marked its surface. Several identification labels had faded with age. Ethan frowned. What is it? Shaw looked toward Lyra. Recovered debris. Lyra slowly stood. All traces of humor vanished from her face. Where? Sector 7. Silence followed. Ethan glanced between them. Something had changed again. Something important. Shaw activated the transmitter. The cabin speakers crackled. Static filled the compartment. Then a distorted voice emerged. Weak. Fragmented. Almost buried beneath interference. Ethan could not identify the speaker. He could barely identify the language. But he saw Lyra's reaction instantly. Her face turned pale. Her breathing stopped. And for the first time since meeting her, genuine fear appeared in her eyes. Then the recording spoke a single name. Lyra! The name echoed through the transport cabin like a distant bell carried across frozen water. Nobody moved. The recording dissolved back into static, but the damage was already done. Ethan watched Lyra carefully. Her eyes remained fixed on the transmitter. Not on the device itself. On the voice trapped inside it. A memory had surfaced. A painful one. He could see it. Commander Shaw slowly powered down the unit. The cabin fell silent except for the low vibration of the transport's engines warming beneath the deck plates. We recovered it 12 hours ago, Shaw said. Buried beneath nearly 20 feet of ice. Lyra swallowed. That is impossible. I thought you might say that. Shaw closed the case. The signal matches Expedition 12 encryption. Ethan looked between them. Somebody want to explain why that matters? Neither answered immediately. Snow hissed against the hull outside. Workers continued loading supplies in the hangar beyond the open ramp. Life moved normally while tension gathered inside the vehicle like a storm front. Finally, Lyra spoke. Because Expedition 12 never carried transmitters. Ethan blinked. What? We were forbidden from bringing them. Her voice sounded distant. The mission was classified. Shaw nodded. Which means someone added that transmitter later. Ethan stared at the black case. The situation had just become much stranger. And somebody recorded your name. Yes. Lyra's expression hardened. 5 years after the mission ended. Shaw checked the time on her wrist display. You leave in 3 minutes. Ethan frowned. That is it? That is all we have. Commander, find the source of the beacon. Shaw looked directly at both of them. And come home with answers. The cargo ramp began rising. Hydraulic motors groaned. The hangar slowly disappeared behind reinforced metal doors. Snow vanished. Light narrowed. Then the transport sealed completely. The world became engines, steel, and vibration. Ethan settled into the pilot's seat while Lyra occupied the navigation station beside him. Neither spoke during departure procedures. External clamps released with a heavy metallic thud. Thrusters engaged. Instruments illuminated across the dashboard. Temperature outside registered -72 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind velocity exceeded 100 miles per hour. Visibility fluctuated between 20 and 60 feet. Ethan whistled softly. Beautiful weather. You humans have unusual definitions of beauty. You should see Florida during hurricane season. The transport rolled forward. Massive treads crushed fresh snow beneath their weight. Soon outpost Kestrel faded into the white distance behind them. The frozen wasteland opened in every direction. Endless ice. Endless wind. Endless sky. Hours passed. The storm intensified. Ethan guided the vehicle across uneven terrain while Lyra monitored navigation data. Occasionally she adjusted their route by a few degrees. Occasionally she corrected environmental readings before the computers detected them. The woman noticed everything. Ethan found that both impressive and slightly irritating. You always this focused? He asked. Yes. Even as a kid? Especially as a child. That sounds exhausting. You mentioned that yesterday. Ethan smiled. Just checking if your answer improved overnight. To his surprise, the corner of her mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Almost. Then a warning alarm interrupted the moment. A sharp tone echoed through the cockpit. Ethan immediately straightened. That sounds expensive. Lyra was already reviewing the display. Her expression darkened. Magnetic surge. Problem? Potentially. Outside, the sky changed color. White clouds shifted toward pale blue. Then violet. Then a strange luminous green. Ethan had seen auroras before. This was different. The light moved too quickly. Like rivers flowing across the atmosphere. That cannot be normal. It is not. Lyra tapped several controls. Plasma activity is increasing. Another alarm sounded. Then another. Wind velocity doubled within seconds. Snow struck the hull hard enough to sound like gravel. Ethan tightened his grip on the controls. Please tell me this thing can handle bad weather. It survived 3 previous expeditions. That is not a reassuring answer. The vehicle lurched unexpectedly. Warning lights flashed amber across the dashboard. Somewhere beneath them, metal groaned. Ethan felt the transport slide several feet sideways before the treads regained traction. Wonderful. You remain remarkably calm. Panic has never improved my driving. Outside, visibility collapsed completely. The windshield became a wall of swirling white illuminated by strange colors dancing overhead. Ethan could barely see 10 feet ahead. Instrument readings fluctuated wildly. Sensors struggled to maintain accuracy. Then every screen in the cockpit flickered simultaneously. Once. Twice. 3 times. The navigation map vanished. Lyra immediately leaned forward. Stop the vehicle. Ethan obeyed without hesitation. The transport settled into the snow. Engines idled. Wind screamed around them. What happened? She stared at the main display. Her face had gone pale again. The beacon. Ethan followed her gaze. A single red marker blinked on the map. Not ahead of them. Not miles away. Not buried somewhere beyond the storm. The signal now appeared less than 1 mile from their position. And according to every sensor aboard the transport, it was moving. For several seconds neither of them spoke. The red marker continued moving across the display at a steady pace. Not fast. Not random. Deliberate. Ethan stared at the screen while the storm hammered the transport from every direction. Tell me the sensor is malfunctioning. Lyra checked 3 separate systems. Then a 4th. Her fingers moved quickly across the controls. I cannot. That was not the answer I was hoping for. It was not the answer I was hoping for either. Another gust struck the vehicle. The entire cabin trembled. Warning lights flashed briefly before stabilizing again. Ethan looked through the windshield. There was nothing outside except swirling white darkness illuminated by shifting green and violet light overhead. The world had vanished beyond the glass. Can we track it? He asked. Barely. Lyra enlarged the map. The red signal drifted across the terrain less than a mile away. Then it stopped. Both of them noticed immediately. The blinking marker remained perfectly still. Waiting. Ethan felt a strange sensation settle into his chest. Not fear exactly. More like anticipation. The feeling of standing before a door that should not exist. That seems worse. I agree. Then every light inside the transport flickered. Once. Twice. The engine hum weakened. Environmental monitors flashed yellow. Ethan looked toward the power readout. Now what? Lyra's expression tightened. The plasma activity is interfering with the reactor shielding. Can we keep moving? Not safely. Another alarm sounded. A different one this time. Lower. Slower. More serious. Ethan had heard enough warning systems during his career to recognize trouble when it arrived. I am guessing that noise is bad. Very. She pulled up a diagnostic report. If we continue driving, we risk losing navigation, communications, and environmental control. Ethan looked back toward the storm outside. Wonderful. That word appears to mean something different when humans use it. He laughed despite the situation. You are learning. The laughter faded quickly. The storm was getting stronger. Sensor readings were deteriorating. Communication signals with outpost Kestrel had already become intermittent. Ethan made the decision. We shelter here. Lyra nodded immediately. Agreed. The transport automatically deployed stabilization anchors beneath the chassis. Metal supports extended into the ice below. Internal systems shifted into conservation mode. Cabin lights dimmed to half power. The engine settled into a low, steady vibration. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Inside, everything became strangely quiet. Hours passed. The signal remained motionless. Neither Ethan nor Lyra trusted that fact. They took turns monitoring sensors while the weather worsened beyond anything the forecasts had predicted. At some point the green and violet glow outside faded completely. Darkness swallowed the world. Ethan sat near the observation port with a steaming cup of coffee balanced between his hands. Across from him, Lyra reviewed old navigation records. Her concentration never seemed to waver. Do you ever stop working? He asked. Occasionally. I have yet to witness this phenomenon. Many people have not. Ethan smiled. The cabin lighting softened the sharp edges of her features. Without the constant tension he had seen since arriving at Kestrel, she looked younger somehow. Less like a legend. More like a person. Can I ask you something? He said. She did not look up. You are going to regardless. Fair point. He took another sip of coffee. Why did you come back? That finally got her attention. Violet eyes lifted from the display. Come back from where? 5 years ago. Silence followed. The soft hum of machinery filled the cabin. Ethan almost apologized. Then Lyra looked away. Toward the dark window. Because someone had to. Her voice was quieter now. The others could not. Ethan waited. She did not continue. You cared about them. Yes. The answer came instantly. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Ethan nodded slowly. For the first time since meeting her, he believed he understood one thing for certain. Whatever happened during Expedition 12 still lived inside her every day. Not as a memory. As a wound. The realization made the stories at Kestrel feel smaller somehow. Simpler. Easier than reality. Another hour passed. Eventually exhaustion caught up with them. Ethan volunteered for first watch. Lyra reluctantly agreed to rest. She moved to the small sleeping compartment near the rear of the transport, and disappeared behind the privacy partition. The cabin became even quieter afterward. Ethan monitored the instruments, while snow scraped endlessly across the hull. Midnight approached. Then 1 o'clock. Then 2. Nothing changed. Until a sound drifted through the cabin. Ethan froze. It was not coming from outside. It was not coming from the engines. It was coming from the sleeping compartment. A voice. Soft. Unsteady. He could not understand the language. But he recognized pain when he heard it. Ethan stood slowly and approached the partition. Lyra was asleep. Or trying to be. Her breathing had become uneven. One hand clutched the edge of a blanket. Her face looked younger in sleep. More vulnerable. More human despite being alien. Then she whispered a single word. One word repeated like a prayer. One word Ethan recognized immediately because he had heard it earlier in the recording recovered from the ice. Noah. The name lingered in the quiet cabin long after Lyra stopped speaking. Ethan remained beside the partition for several seconds, listening to the steady rhythm of the engines and the distant howl of the storm outside. Noah. The same name from the recording. The same name that had transformed her expression every time it appeared. He returned to the cockpit without waking her. Some stories belong to the person carrying them. The hours crawled by. Frost slowly crept across the edges of the windshield despite the heating systems working at full capacity. Sensor readings fluctuated. Communications remained unreliable. The red beacon still pulsed on the navigation display less than a mile away. Waiting. Motionless. Patient. Just before dawn, the storm finally began to weaken. Wind speeds dropped. Visibility improved from almost nothing to nearly 200 feet. It was not much, but after an entire night trapped inside a wall of white, it felt like seeing sunlight after a long winter. Ethan was studying the external cameras when he heard footsteps behind him. Lyra entered the cockpit carrying a cup of tea. Her silver hair was slightly disheveled. For the first time since meeting her, she looked like someone who had actually slept. "You should have woken me for second watch," she said. "You looked like you needed the rest." She sat down beside him and reviewed the overnight logs. "Any changes?" Ethan hesitated. "The beacon stopped moving. I can see that. And I heard you talking in your sleep." Her hand froze for the briefest moment. Then she continued scrolling through the reports. "That is unfortunate. You mentioned Noah?" Silence settled between them. Not hostile. Not comfortable either. The kind of silence that appeared when two people stood near a locked door and neither was certain whether it should be opened. Finally Lyra set the tablet down. Her eyes remained fixed on the windshield. "Noah Mercer was our communications specialist." Ethan waited. "Expedition 12? She nodded. "The best engineer I ever worked with." Her voice softened slightly. "He could repair almost anything." Outside, pale blue light slowly spread across the frozen horizon. The storm clouds were beginning to break apart. "The recording sounded like him," Ethan said carefully. "I know. Do you think it is possible?" Lyra gave a small humorless smile. "That he survived 5 years beneath a glacier?" Ethan shrugged. I have seen stranger things. Not on this planet. The certainty in her voice ended that possibility. Yet the sadness remained. Ethan could hear it. You miss him. Every day. She stared out at the endless ice. All of them. The answer carried more weight than any explanation she had given before. For several moments neither spoke. Then Lyra surprised him. You want to know what happened? Ethan looked at her. Only if you want to tell me. She considered that. Then she nodded slowly. 5 years ago, our expedition discovered a civilian colony trapped beyond the northern ice shelf. Ethan listened quietly. A magnetic catastrophe had disabled their life support systems. Tens of thousands of people were going to die if help did not arrive. Her hands tightened around the teacup. At the same time, our own transport suffered critical failures. Ethan already knew where the story was going. You had to choose. Lyra nodded once. Return home with my team. She paused. Or use our remaining resources to save the colony. The cabin seemed smaller suddenly. The humming engines louder. What did your team want? He asked. To go home. The answer arrived immediately. Honest. Painful. And you? She looked down at the tea in her hands. I could not abandon 38,000 civilians. Ethan leaned back in his seat. The pieces were beginning to fit together. Not all of them. Enough. So you stayed? Yes. And your team? Lyra closed her eyes briefly. Not everyone agreed with my decision. The sentence contained years of regret. Years of second-guessing. Years of living with consequences. Ethan understood that tone. He had heard it from veterans, rescue workers, and commanders. People who carried impossible choices long after the moment itself ended. The colony survived, she said quietly. Every single person. Ethan looked at her. That sounds like something worth being proud of. A sad smile touched her lips. The galaxy disagreed. Before he could respond, a warning tone suddenly interrupted the conversation. Both of them snapped toward the display. The beacon had changed. The red marker was moving again. Faster this time. Not away from them. Not across the ice. Directly toward them. And according to the rapidly updating distance counter, whatever was generating the signal was now less than 500 feet from the transport. The distance counter dropped from 500 feet to 420 in less than 3 seconds. Ethan immediately reached for the sensor controls. That is impossible. The red marker continued advancing across the display. 400 feet. 380. 350. Whatever was generating the signal was moving through the storm faster than any person could travel on foot. Lyra's eyes remained fixed on the screen. Activate exterior cameras. Ethan obeyed. Multiple video feeds appeared across the dashboard. Snow. Ice. Darkness. Nothing else. He switched to thermal imaging. The result was the same. Empty white terrain stretching in every direction. Yet the signal continued approaching. 300 feet. 280. 250. The transport's internal systems began issuing proximity warnings. A soft tone echoed through the cockpit every few seconds. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Not because he was afraid. Because none of this made sense. Can you identify what we are looking at? He asked. No. Lyra's voice remained calm, but he could see tension in her posture. The signal characteristics are wrong. Wrong how? The beacon should be stationary. Another warning tone sounded. 200 feet. 200 feet exactly. Then the marker stopped moving. Silence filled the cockpit. Outside, the storm had weakened enough to reveal fragments of the landscape. Jagged ridges of blue ice emerged from the drifting snow. Pale sunlight filtered through broken clouds overhead. Ethan scanned every camera feed. Nothing. No vehicle. No structure. No person. I see absolutely nothing. Lyra slowly stood. Because we are looking in the wrong direction. Before Ethan could ask what she meant, she pointed downward, directly beneath the transport. A chill ran through him. The marker was no longer approaching them. It had stopped exactly where they were parked. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then a faint vibration traveled through the deck plates beneath their feet. Not mechanical. Not from the engines. Something else. Ethan felt it through his boots. A low tremor. Almost like distant thunder trapped beneath the ice. The vibration came again. Slightly stronger this time. Lyra moved toward the equipment locker. "We need to go outside." Ethan stared at her. "You realize normal people would immediately reject that idea. Normal people did not spend 5 years searching for answers." She handed him an insulated field jacket. "And normal people are not standing on top of the signal source." That was difficult to argue with. 10 minutes later they stepped onto the frozen surface. The cold hit immediately. Sharp. Dry. Relentless. Ethan's breath crystallized in front of his face. Wind swept loose snow across the ice in silver ribbons. The transport loomed behind them like a stranded ship in a frozen ocean. Ahead stretched endless white emptiness. Yet the portable tracker in Lyra's hand emitted a steady pulse. Stronger than ever. Ethan looked around. Still nothing. "Wait." She knelt beside a ridge of ice several yards from the transport. Ethan joined her. At first he saw only snow. Then sunlight shifted. Something beneath the surface reflected the light. Metal. Old metal. Buried deep beneath layers of ice. Lyra brushed away loose snow with a gloved hand. More metal emerged. Curved. Dark. Artificial. Her breathing slowed. Ethan noticed immediately. "You recognize it?" She nodded once. Very slowly. "Yes." "What is it?" For a moment she simply stared. 5 years of questions seemed to gather inside her eyes. 5 years of guilt. Doubt. Memory. Then she answered. "It is part of our transport." Ethan felt the world narrow around those words. Expedition 12? They had found it. Or part of it. The realization settled heavily between them. Lyra remained motionless. Not triumphant. Not relieved. Just quiet. Ethan understood why. Discovering answers was easy in stories. Real life was different. Answers carried weight. Sometimes they carried grief. The tracker suddenly emitted a louder tone. Both of them looked down. The signal's strength had doubled. Then doubled again. Ethan frowned. "That cannot be good." The ice beneath their feet vibrated once more. Stronger than before. Snow slid from nearby ridges. Tiny fractures appeared across the surface. Hairline cracks stretching outward beneath the pale sunlight. Lyra rose instantly. "Move!" Ethan did not hesitate. They backed away together as another tremor rolled through the glacier. The cracks widened. Not dramatically. Not violently. Just enough to reveal darkness below. A hidden space beneath the ice. Something enormous had been buried there for years. Something the glacier had concealed from the world. Then a faint transmission suddenly crackled through Ethan's helmet receiver. Static filled his ears. Broken fragments of sound followed. Distorted. Weak. Almost impossible to understand. Almost. Because this time the voice was unmistakable. "Lyra, if you can hear this." The voice dissolved into static almost immediately. Then silence returned. Ethan stood frozen beside the widening fracture in the ice while wind swept across the glacier in long, mournful waves. Beside him, Lyra did not move. For several seconds she seemed unable to breathe. The transmission had lasted less than 5 seconds. Yet it had shattered 5 years of certainty. "That was him," she whispered. Ethan looked toward her. "You are sure?" "Yes." The answer came instantly. No hesitation. No doubt. Her eyes remained fixed on the darkness beneath the ice. "I would recognize Noah's voice anywhere." Another tremor rolled through the glacier. Small fragments of ice slid into the opening below. The crack widened another few inches. Ethan activated a portable scanner and aimed it downward. The display immediately filled with returns. Metal. Structural supports. Power conduits. Artificial shapes hidden beneath hundreds of feet of frozen terrain. His pulse quickened. There is an entire structure down there. Lyra nodded slowly. The transport. Not just the transport. Ethan enlarged the scan results. Something bigger. The scanner continued mapping the hidden space beneath them. Corridors appeared. Chambers. Support frames. An entire section of the glacier concealed what looked like an underground complex. Ethan had never seen anything like it. How could nobody find this? Lyra finally looked away from the opening. Because nobody searched where I told them to. The bitterness in her voice caught him off guard. Not anger. Exhaustion. 5 years of repeating the same truth to people who had already decided not to believe it. Ethan understood now. More than before. You told them this place existed. Many times. Wind rattled against their helmets. Snow drifted across the ice around them. And they ignored you. A sad smile appeared briefly. It was easier that way. Ethan stared into the darkness below. The story everyone believed suddenly felt fragile. Incomplete. Commander Shaw had been right. Reality was Messier. The scanner emitted a sharp notification tone. Ethan checked the display. One section of the hidden structure still contained power. Very little. Barely measurable. Yet unmistakably active. Lyra! She immediately stepped beside him. What is it? He pointed toward the screen. Something down there is still running. For the first time since discovering the wreckage, hope appeared in her eyes. Not much. Just enough to hurt if it disappeared. They hurried back toward the transport. Inside the warmth of the cabin, Ethan connected the scanner to the navigation systems. Data streamed across multiple displays. Slowly, the hidden structure emerged as a three-dimensional model. The image rotated above the console. Lyra stared at it silently. Ethan noticed her hands trembling slightly. You okay? No. Her honesty surprised him. But I am trying. The model finished rendering. A large chamber appeared near the center of the buried structure. Unlike the surrounding sections, it still possessed power. A faint blinking indicator marked its location. Ethan zoomed in. The system identified a communications hub. Lyra closed her eyes briefly. Noah's station. Ethan looked at her. You are certain? He managed all long-range transmissions. She swallowed. If anyone could keep an emergency beacon running for years, it would be him. Silence filled the cockpit. Both of them understood what that meant. Not that Noah was alive. Not necessarily. But the message had come from somewhere. The beacon had not appeared by accident. Someone had wanted Lyra to find this place. Someone had wanted the truth uncovered. A sudden communication alert interrupted the thought. The transport's receiver crackled to life. Commander Shaw's voice emerged through heavy interference. Walker. Vane, report. Ethan immediately grabbed the transmitter. Commander, we read you. Static answered. Then her voice returned. Fragmented but understandable. Weather window closing, extraction recommended. Ethan exchanged a glance with Lyra. He knew exactly what the commander was saying. Leave. Return safely. Bring back the data. Nobody would blame them. Nobody would question it. The mission had already succeeded. Then Lyra quietly shook her head. Not at Shaw. At the idea itself. Ethan looked at the model hovering above the console. 5 years. 5 years of accusations. 5 years of rumors. 5 years of carrying a decision that saved 38,000 civilians while the galaxy treated her like a failure. And now the answers sat directly beneath them. Buried under ice and silence. Waiting. Shaw's voice crackled again. Walker, decision. Ethan took a slow breath. Then he reached for the transmitter. Commander. Static hissed across the channel. We are staying. Lyra looked at him. Genuine surprise crossed her face. Walker. He raised a hand gently. You spent 5 years trying to make people listen. Outside, the wind howled across the glacier. Inside, the communications hub beneath the ice continued blinking steadily on the display. Ethan met her eyes. I think we should finally hear what Noah was trying to say. Then every monitor inside the transport suddenly flashed red, and a new transmission began broadcasting from somewhere beneath the glacier. Every monitor inside the transport glowed crimson. Warning tones echoed through the cabin before abruptly cutting off. Then a voice emerged from the speakers. Clearer than before. Stronger. Older. If this message is playing, then you found us. Lyra froze. Ethan watched her grip the edge of the console so tightly that her knuckles turned pale beneath blue skin. The voice continued. Lyra, I know you will blame yourself. You always did. Static crackled briefly. Then the recording stabilized again. So listen carefully and do not interrupt me this time. Ethan heard a small sound escape her throat. Half laugh. Half heartbreak. The kind that only appeared when a memory returned unexpectedly. Noah's voice carried warmth. Familiarity. Trust. The colony survived because of you, the recording said. All 38,000 of them. Every child. Every family. Every person who never knew how close they came to losing everything. Ethan saw tears forming in Lyra's eyes for the first time. She did not look away from the speakers. The council will blame you, Noah continued. Some of our own people will blame you too. They will say you abandoned protocol. They will say you made the wrong decision. They will say many things because the truth is inconvenient. The transport cabin seemed impossibly quiet. Even the wind outside felt distant. But we were there, Noah said. We saw what happened. Ethan glanced toward the data stream scrolling across the monitors. Hidden beneath the audio file were thousands of archived documents. Logs. Sensor records. Mission reports. Personal testimonies. Evidence. Years of evidence. Every member of Expedition 12 signed this statement willingly. Noah continued. We chose to stay. Not because Lyra ordered us to. Because it was the right thing to do. Lyra closed her eyes. A single tear slipped down her cheek. The official report will never tell you that, Noah said softly. So we buried the truth where nobody could erase it. Ethan understood now. The beacon. The transmitter. The hidden communications hub. None of it had been an accident. It had been a message. A promise preserved beneath the ice. Noah's voice grew quieter. If you are hearing this, then we are long gone. Static whispered through the speakers. Do not carry us as a burden anymore, Lyra. Carry us as proof. The transmission ended. Silence followed. No alarms. No warnings. Just the low hum of the transport, and the distant sound of wind moving across the glacier. Ethan looked at the mountain of archived data now flowing through the systems. Hundreds of signed statements. Mission records. Civilian testimonies from the colony they had saved. Every piece of evidence necessary to tell the truth. At last. Hours later, the storm finally broke. Blue sky appeared above the glacier for the first time since they arrived. Sunlight reflected across endless fields of ice. The world seemed brighter somehow. Cleaner. The return trip to outpost Kestrel felt different. Neither Ethan nor Lyra spoke much. They did not need to. Some victories arrived quietly. When they reached the station, Commander Shaw met them personally inside the hangar. She listened to the recovered files in complete silence. Then she spent the next 12 hours transmitting copies to every major authority in the sector. By morning, the story had spread across dozens of systems. By evening, it had spread across hundreds. The response was immediate. Not because people suddenly became better. Because evidence is difficult to argue with when it refuses to disappear. The records proved everything. Lyra had not sacrificed her team. She had saved an entire colony. Her teammates had supported the decision. The official narrative had been incomplete from the beginning. 1 week later, a formal ceremony was held at Outpost Kestrel. Representatives from multiple worlds attended. Speeches were delivered. Medals were presented. Public apologies were offered. Ethan stood near the back of the room through all of it. He noticed something interesting. None of those moments seemed to matter much to Lyra. The applause, the recognition, the titles being restored. She accepted them politely. But her eyes remained distant, as though she were listening for voices that no longer existed. Later that night, after the crowds departed and the station returned to normal, Ethan found her standing alone in the observation dome. The same place where he had first seen the beacon flashing through the storm. Beyond the glass, stars filled the sky. Thousands of them. Silent and endless. Lyra stood with her hands folded behind her back. Watching. Thinking. Remembering. Ethan walked over and sat down on a nearby bench. He did not say anything. After a moment, he simply patted the empty space beside him. Lyra looked at the bench. Then at him. For a second she seemed confused by the gesture. Then she understood. Slowly she sat down. Neither spoke. They watched the stars together. Somewhere beyond those distant lights existed 38,000 people who were alive because of a decision made 5 years ago. Somewhere beyond those stars existed the memory of a team who chose compassion over safety. Ethan finally glanced toward her. The weight she carried was still there. Some scars never fully disappear. But something else was there too. Peace. Small. Fragile. Real. The stars reflected in her violet eyes. And for the first time since he had met her, they did not look lonely.